And I want to welcome you to another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, where confusion dies and progress thrives. So we are streaming live to Substack, and this is something that I do on Mondays at 8 o'clock a.m. So this is an actual podcast episode that will post in the future for at the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So if you want to check that out, you'll be able to hear this. And just know that whenever I interact here on Substack and I see people coming in, Grand Rising, that's awesome. Grand Rising Dragon, Michelle. I see Todd. I see Meek Des. I love these names. Michael, and there's Matthew. Good to see all of you, and welcome to those joining us. But this is my live streamed Substack version of the podcast, and it's kind of like a broadcast that's going to be for future usage and an episode that's going to drop on the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. But Substack is my new favorite playground. Great morning, Bear Sage. Bear Sage and I are playing on Substack what's called Tag You're It. This is a really, really cool game. Bear Sage is a fantastic writer, so go check him out. And if you're a fantastic writer and you've got something to say, reach out to me. I'd love to discover you. But Bear has written something that I really, really loved. And if you want to um, go read his story about fences. So what he did, and this is a fun thing for Substack, off the topic right now. Tag your it is when you write something, and anybody can do this, but it's always best if you kind of give the other person a little heads up if you want to grow your Substack and also do it through collaboration. But what you do, and this is what Bear did, is at the end of his post, which was fantastic, he tagged me and said, I'd love to get your insight on this. So, first of all, that's a great way to collaborate. And then also, what it did was it gave me the ability to take his topic and go, and write my own. And that will post tomorrow. So, I hope you will like it. Of course, what I love to do is very much emulated through this live that I do, through my podcast, through the Writer's Way show that we're doing. If anybody wants to be on the Writer's Way, which is just my way of taking just this amazing world of creativity and the creative process of the writer and exposing the writer behind it, what they do, what they write about, and also why. So Bear says, whoop, whoop, looking forward to reading your thoughts. Now I'm nervous. Anyway, so great morning, everybody. As a quick reminder, all of my work, at least what I think it is, I hope it interprets this way, is just meant to help people reclaim control, especially on a Monday morning as we're looking forward to this day and this week. And this week, we're just coming off of a dreamlike, you know, weekend. We live in a world where we don't really think for ourselves, right? Michael said he's going to go read it. Yeah, go read Bear's first before you read mine. His is awesome. Made me think. Made me say, But all my work is just recognizing that we live in an overstimulated, algorithm-driven, agenda, agendic, algorithm-driven world that's really doing the thinking for us. We don't know it, but if you're consuming, you're assuming, right? So there's an interesting thing about the human brain, and this is where all of my work kind of points towards, is that the only part of your brain that is actually yours and that you control is that prefrontal cortex, that CEO that is very often persuaded by your lower levels of the brain. But when you think for yourself, you're using your conscious mind. Great morning, Jarr, joining us. So when I present something that inspires you or that makes you think, right? What happens is that you start thinking for yourself. So the time that you spend with me, whether you're reading my Substack, whether you're watching these lives or the Writer's Way or listening to my podcast, if you like this kind of stuff, you will love my podcast. Very exciting about my podcast, by the way. I just signed a contract with another company to host my podcast with like serious advertising and stuff. It's kind of funny because my podcast doesn't really align with certain things. And there was a McDonald's commercial on one of my episodes. So I talked to them and I'm like, I'd prefer to stay away from McDonald's. Um, there's one of my favorite writers, Ananya. Great morning, Ananya. She's great. Very, very dedicated writer as well. So in any case, that's what I do, and that's what this is about. You're about to come along on a journey and hear what I would consider the most magical story that I have ever experienced in my own life, and that is how I met my lovely wife, found love, and also how I met what I call my dream daughter. So I call this episode "Synchronicity, Love, and Miracles," and it's an excerpt from my soon-to-be published book, which is called "Make Sense." Go figure. And it's coming out in February in Chicago at this big event called Creative Con. And my great friend Jim Quick is going to do a forward in it, and we're gonna launch this book that I've been working on for 8 years. But in that book, one of the core concepts that you'll find in that book is I unveil these 10 powerful synchronistic insights. We're going to talk about synchronicity here, that came to me throughout the majority of my life, as they are probably with you. And they became not just insights that gave me clarity, but they became like pivotal moments in my life. And I feel like a lot of people are just they're trapped in what I call the comfort trap. And that's like this jacuzzi experience where you're just like going along thinking that you know things and stuff like that. Like my hat stands for, by the way, I'm selling these hats now. This is pretty exciting. I haven't like figured out how to launch that yet, but um, Hmm, HMMM stands for I haven't made up my mind yet, and I don't think I ever will. I never really understood why it would be important to make up my mind about something. I can have certainty about something, but I like to remain open and curious to more. So that's important. And these 10 powerful insights that I share, they're stories where I grab these insights, they became pivotal moments and level ups in, I guess you'd say, my conscious awareness. So each one of them, and I'm going to share one of them via a story, each one of them leading to the next. So this particular story comes from what you'll see is chapter 13, which is aptly called Synchronicity, Love, and Miracles, which is wonderful topics all around. I got so many questions. Let's go, Michael. Yeah, but let me get into the meat of it first. Great morning, Margaret Williams. Good to see folks coming in. Yeah, I love questions. And by the way, I don't look at anything and label it as good or bad. Good question, bad question. I even welcome people to say, I think you're full of shit. And I think this is stupid. I very often make an attempt and make the claim that I don't have an opinion about things. And sometimes people challenge me. It sounds like you have an opinion. So, what I want to say about that whenever I share things, I'm going to share an actual true story here. But what I mean when I say I don't have an opinion, I think what I really mean is I'm not attached to an opinion. So if I ever come across like I'm giving my opinion, um, just recognize that that's at this time. I like to live my life as a scientist, and a scientist doesn't care about being right. A scientist always remains open to what could be better because they're more interested in finding the best version. I like to chase better, right? So that's what I mean is I come across with my opinions sometimes, but they're very, very much open for discussion. So if somebody challenges me or criticizes me, they won't get the typical response that they get from other people where they'll fight back and pick a stance. I will say, well, listen, I'm all ears. I'm all ears. If somebody thinks that what I'm saying is a bunch of crap or that I'm wrong, just recognize I don't need to be right, but also I will listen. I will listen because I've been humbled by life. I don't know about you. I've been humbled by life. And I just think that God laughs at people that make plans and people that think that they know things. So there's no exclamation points at the end of my sentences, even if they sound like there are. So today's episode is about love and miracles, and what happens when you finally start tuning into this frequency where these things exist. I think a lot of people are looking for love. Um, and a lot of things. A lot of people are struggling to break through some barriers, and the topic of love and miracles is very, very interesting. But what I'm going to expose to you now, something I've spoken about before, the omen frequency, is that there's a certain frequency where these things exist. And I think you understand what I'm saying is, sometimes you tapped into that, sometimes you think you're in it, sometimes you made a mistake thinking you were in it. But love and miracles, is about what happens when you finally start tuning into the frequency. So that's what the big message is today, is there's this place, this frequency where some of the most miraculous things are taking place, but it's not something that you have to go out and find. It's something that already exists, and you just have to tune into it. So personal growth, self-development, getting out of your own way, living in the present moment, detaching from the past and the future. These are some, and meditation, right? These are some strategies. So as a reminder, knowing about the frequency, because you're going to once again find out about it, does not automatically grant you access to it. There's much work to be done. Remember, I'm going to share with you the ninth insight of my book. So you'll notice that I had to go through the 8 insights and synchronicities to be able to even see that one. And I'll hit that again in a second. So there's much work to be done. And the first and most crucial step, though, is the one we're about to take. For some of you, great morning, Tarad, Neige, Neige. I'm going to just assume that the J has a Z to it. But the first, most crucial step we're about to take is to simply become aware. I think awareness is the most impressive weapon to become armed with in life if you're seeking growth. So we get armed with this weapon of awareness, and you know what happens when you become aware of something. Oh, I guess Tarad is saying fire, meaning I said it right. So armed with this weapon of awareness, what it'll do to the human brain is it'll trigger curiosity. And curiosity can and typically does turn into this situation where you become somewhat of a detective that starts directing your attention and focus outside the realm of what we consider to be the known, right? So this whole concept of thinking that you know things, right? That lives in this area of the known. And ironically, everything we learn about personal growth says that it exists in the outside of the known, the outside the comfort zone, right? So curiosity makes you think. And that's what I was talking about before. And it makes you step a little bit outside, especially when it's something new outside of the known. So this frequency, this omen frequency, already exists, but it resides in the unknown, of course. Of course. The universe and God wouldn't make it so easy to hand it to you on a plate or wrap it in a box and put it under your Christmas tree. Well, actually, I would venture to say that these miraculous things have been wrapped in a box under the Christmas tree, but it's that present that you forgot that's behind the tree that you forgot to unwrap. So maybe we're going to unwrap a present today. And that's what makes it so powerful, is that it has eluded you and it requires the, precursor of you awakening first, which is not easy in this world. So brief backstory, you know, I want to kind of like catch you up to where we're at in the journey. So these synchronicities and insights that I talk about in the book, what they represent is my personal roadmap. And you all have these through this process that we can call awakening. Each one of them cracked me open a certain way. And you'll learn that you have these things too. Like whenever I have this conversation, the book conversation with people, people very easily can share their own versions of that. So you'll learn that you have these things too that are cracking you open, but sometimes you just didn't pay attention to them, right? Sometimes you just maybe thought they were insignificant, or you got, washed back away and cluttered with the noise. So to phase place this story that I'm going to share with you in my book, by the time I had reached what I call in the book the ninth synchronicity, the ninth insight, I still had 2 unresolved battles in my life that were holding me back from, I guess, my desire to experience peace. I don't know, whatever that even means. I keep seeing the finish line of peace get pushed back further. But that's what I was seeking. One of those battles that I was still fighting, even after all this work, was the fractured and misunderstood relationship that I had with my father, right? A little bit of thumb sucking there. And that was a wound that probably, I would say, had shaped most of my life. That wound, like meaning I designed my life around that wound as a victim of it. And that was a wound that came from my parents' divorce. And I'm not here to talk about divorce and all of that stuff, but in the book, you'll see that one of the things I had to do was mend the fence. I had to voluntarily mend the fence with my father in order to be able to expose what just happens or what happens next with this story. So the other one, which is what the story I'm going to say, is this thing that always eluded me, and that was the mystery of love, the elusive connection of love that is very, very interesting. Here's my live throat clear. Um, we're always figuring love out, right? It's such a weird, elusive thing. But I was chasing it. I was chasing it, and even though I had evolved and awakened, I just couldn't seem to locate it and hold on to it. Sometimes I thought I had it. Sometimes I knew I didn't have it. Sometimes I gave up on it. So I kind of felt, and I don't know if you feel the same way when it comes to love. I felt like the universe was kind of waiting for me to resolve the first thing, the mending the fences. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just being guided to mend that relationship with my father in order to open myself up to the other. Does anybody relate with that? This idea of like we have to, the strategy and the analogy is called peak to peak. And what that means is if you're looking for the mountain behind the mountain, sometimes you have to climb and summit the peak of the mountain in front of you in order to take a peek at the one behind you. So I call that peak to peak. So mending the fences with my father was the first mountain. And once I got up there, you'll see that I tapped into that omen frequency. So conquering that first challenge of mending that fence with my father became what I consider the catalyst that ultimately tuned me in, right? Remember, it already exists, tuned me into this omen frequency. And this led me to finding love, finding the love of my life, and also this mysterious dream that I had been having coming true. Have you ever had a dream come true? Isn't that interesting? And I just love that saying. This is a dream come true. And what that insinuates is I've been dreaming about this and it came true. So here's the story of how I met my wife, which other people refer to me as the dragon. She's known as the chicken, and what I call my dream daughter. It's a beautiful story. So, if you're the kind of person that is emotional like myself, you might want to grab a tissue. But anyway, face placing after my divorce, ironically, right? I was traumatized by divorce, so it led to my divorce. I was never going to get divorced, but after my divorce, I promised myself that I was going to take the high road. My strategy, probably fired by guilt, right? Fueled by guilt, was take the high road. No bitterness, no drama. I was going to become and model the greatest ex-husband and deadbeat dad that ever existed, right? So I just put all my focus on that. But once the dust settled of all of that work, once the dust settled of me trying to do everything right, fueled by guilt, the silence set in. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that. I didn't rush to get in relationships, probably fueled by guilt once again, but the silence started to set in and I started to feel lonely again. And that's not fun. And so boom, here comes that love. The desire for love and the need for love becomes more powerful when you feel lonely. So I was single for 7 years, right? And this is like that 7 years was like within 10 years, 15 years ago. Single for 7 years, 7 long years of dating apps, empty profiles, and conversations that were leading to nowhere, even though I was making them appear like they were going somewhere. But intuitively, I knew they were going nowhere. So, relationship after relationship, if you want to call them relationships, it became increasingly apparent that true love was not in my cards. It was not part of my future. I don't know if you've ever felt like that, but I just said, hey, I guess it's just not for me. So I became disenchanted with my search for my soulmate at that time. What as Michael says, how do you know what's the problem based off of the trauma from your past? How do you know what the problem is based off of the trauma? You know, that God, you could get so many different answers to that, Michael. But I would just say, I don't know anything, right? So that's important for you to understand about me. But I can make a strong, assumption that has a level of certainty in it that, you know, what I've learned at 54 years old is that when I experienced trauma in the past, it happened for a reason, right? So I wouldn't call it a problem because I look at it differently. I've shifted the way I look at everything. I've changed the way I look at things so that the things that I look at can change. So if I have past trauma, rather than me trying to go repair that trauma, what I do is I ask questions. Well, what else might be true? What, I understand how that happened to me, but how did it happen for me? Right. So that's when you get in this moment, and this is just where I'm at this time with it, and I hope it lands for you, that my trauma was not a bad thing or a good thing. It was just a thing, but my system of belief, which probably has a side order of faith and hope, right? I mean, like, who knows about belief? Was that it was guiding me. It was guiding me. So no matter what happens today, I always ask myself what the lesson is and what's guiding. So I have a different take on trauma. I'm not a big fan of trying to go resolve trauma. What I do like to do is just change the way I look at and reframe trauma. So hopefully that helps. So 7 years on dating apps, empty profiles, and relationship after relationship, I became increasingly apparent to me that it wasn't in my cards. So when you become disenchanted with this idea that love is not for you, you know, it made me kind of like lose my gas to search for my soulmate. And it kind of like made me redirect my intentions and my attention inward. I kind of gave up on looking for what I needed outside of me, and I took care of my temple. So I began working on my health. If you know my story, I lost 80 pounds. I got the best shape of my life, which prompted me to become a health coach. And I've helped hundreds of thousands of people in that realm. So I'm building my physical health, my mental health. I worked on my business, all to become a better person in the eyes of my children. And that's the whole thing. But my heart, right? Outside of my family love, my heart in the realm of love, it was kind of on airplane mode. So, that's like, it's like airplane mode for me means that it wasn't open, it was closed, right? So there's a lot to be said about that. It's like, I don't know if you can find love, but I think you can attract it, right? Or you can step into the frequency. And yet through all of these things that could have prevented, the divine from taking place, miracles from transpiring, I still had this open and curious nature about me. Something miraculous kept happening to me during these 7 years. And this is really, really crucial because I know some of you are having dreams like this right now, and you might not know their relevance as I didn't. But I was having, for the length of those 7 years, I was having these vivid, reoccurring dreams that I had a daughter. Now I have two boys from my previous marriage, wonderful boys. But I was having this dream that I had a daughter. And in every dream, it was the same little girl again and again. I watched her grow up. I watched her, or I walked her down the aisle when she got married at every age, right? I knew her laugh, her eyes. I knew her like she was my own. And it was really weird. I could draw a picture of her. If she walked by, I could point her out because it was the same girl. She didn't exist in my waking life, but the love that I felt for her was as real as anything in my waking life. I don't know if you could relate to that. So then came this ordinary night. And I think that this is kind of a cliche story, but it was an ordinary night where ordinary became extraordinary, I guess I would say. So I decided to admit defeat on the love thing. And finally, it was funny how we do this. Was that I'm just going to close up shop. I started deleting all the dating apps, right? Enough was enough. One by one, cutting ties with the many threads and conversations that were going nowhere, but making me feel, desirable. I think that's probably what I was doing. Um, until all of a sudden, here comes the universe, right? I paused on the last app that I was going to delete, which, if you're not a dating app person, it was called Bumble. Tarad says, every scar is a page of your sacred manual. Oh, I love that. I know the manual, right? I've upgraded my manual. Read it, don't rewrite it too soon. I love the fact that you said too soon because I think it's okay to rewrite it, but read it first, right? Read it first. So I'm going to delete this last app called Bumble, and there she was. What are the odds of this? A photo of a woman from Queens, New York, ironically, Queens, right? She was beautiful and different, but ironically, I remember thinking she wasn't my type, as if I knew what my type was, right? Isn't that funny how somebody that does not have the love of their life claims to have a type? But anyway, here's the weird thing. My search radius on this app was set for 15 miles within where I lived. She was like 40 miles away. So the idea of her somehow universally, God intervening slipped into my feed or my radius is really miraculous. I think I later found out that it's probably because I was on a business trip and I was driving by and I somehow mistakenly turned the app on when I was going within the radius. But either way, astronomical how that happened. So when I saw her picture, something inside me whispered, pay attention. I don't know if you can relate to that. Something said, pay attention, JC. Pay attention. So I did. And I remember I halted the idea of deleting the app. And I just muttered to myself something in French. I said, merde quoi, which kind of translates, it could be a swear, but it basically translates to screw it. It's another way of saying that. So I swiped right. And that was an indication and a gesture to inform this interesting human that had stopped me that I approved. I was interested. So interestingly enough, in the 24 hours that she had to reply to my approval, nothing happened. So 24 hours was about to transpire. And what happens on these dating apps is these people just disappear. You never see them again. It's like one shot. So completely not like myself, right? But there was something else going on. I made a decision to pay like I think like $15 to extend it for another 24 hours. Totally not something I would ever do because I had an unhealthy ego, but I extended it, the discovery window, right, for about 24 hours. So I went to sleep and the next morning I woke up to a one-word message from this creature and it just said, "Hi." Those two letters, that was it, right? But those two letters had enough voltage to reroute my entire life. So isn't that interesting? It's like homeopathy. Something so small and diluted as a result of just paying attention can completely, neuroplastically rewire and reroute your entire life. So when you know, right? I mean, we talked, for an hour, for hours, and went on a couple of dates. She had this amazing, pristine voice because she's South African. It had somewhat of a melodic quality to it. Her mind, right? I loved her mind. It was like boom, boom, check, 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 electric and eccentric. So our first date became a second, then a third. Everything about it just felt perfect, like perfect. So when you know, you know. So she literally, I know that a lot of people would say this is foolish, but she literally moved in with me 2 weeks, within 2 weeks. And that was to the chagrin of her parents, obviously. So she didn't have a daughter, right? Back to the dream. She didn't have a daughter. She was single. She had never been married. Um, So I assumed, I just remembered taking that story and allowing it to still transpire in my dreams, but kind of putting it in the cold case file and just letting it remain as a pleasant dream. I just I wouldn't say I gave up on it, but so we just couldn't be without each other. And I hope that you have experienced what that's like. It was just pure bliss. So 2 weeks in, we're moving fast, right? She moved in with me. 2 weeks in, she says something. And I remember this moment. She says, I have to tell you something. And I was so in love with this girl that I didn't care what she said next. What, you have a wooden leg? You used to be a man? Whatever. I'm in. It's like, you know that you know, you know. She says, there's something that you need to know. So I braced myself, but I remember I was fine with it, whatever she says. I've got three extra other husbands. I'm like, all right, we can work through that. Right? I mean, I love this girl. So she shared this really, really sad story that her sister had tragically recently passed away. Very, very sad story. And then I remember, as if in slow motion, she said, and she left behind a little girl, her daughter, which was my wife's niece. And I just remember that, hearing that and starting to move into this other space, this curious space. I hadn't tuned into it yet. And she wanted me to know with absolute, confidence and certainty, kind of like an ultimatum, that, as she said, she goes, so I come with a daughter. You need to know I come with a daughter. Now, when she said that, and she said the D word, and I hadn't seen this girl yet, I became cold and lightheaded in that moment. So this is what it feels like when you tune into this outside or behind the scenes frequency. I became cold and lightheaded, as if I was kind of like in a scene of a movie, and everybody in the movie theater was like clutching the seats with their hands, white knuckling the seats. Um, and I know that everybody that was watching this story and the whole universe was just hoping that this was actually happening, right? Great morning, Earth Star One. Welcome to the show. You're going to want to hear the beginning of this. So when it posts. So cold and lightheaded, and just like, oh my God. And I said, all I could say was, may I see a picture? Now, she has no idea about my dreams and stuff like that, right? I said, can I see a picture of her? So she handed me her phone, and I scrolled just a little bit, and I saw this girl, and I froze. I completely froze, which is not typical for me as well. So the girl that I was looking at on the screen was the daughter that I had been dreaming of, hand to God. And I know that this would be hard for somebody to believe, but it doesn't matter to me, right? I had been dreaming about this girl on a regular basis for 7 years. She had the same eyes, the same smile, the same spirit, everything. What happened in that moment, it was a bit overwhelming, but in a good way. I felt the world kind of tilt in that moment. And I became cold, but at the same time, I would say kind of electric, excited, nervous, all that stuff together. I felt completely alive, like all of my senses were on fire. And I also felt like my faith was kind of like coming back online because I had lost it. It was offline. But then I thought to myself, how do you explain this? How do you explain this? How do you navigate telling the love of your life that, the greatest thing that's ever happened to you, that you've been dreaming of a little girl? And then, you know, pointing to her niece and saying, that's her. I mean, like, how creepy could that come across? Well, you don't try to navigate that. What you do is you take a deep breath and you believe, right? And you just speak the truth because you're in the omen frequency and it's pure, right? So I told her about my dreams and, about walking this little girl down the aisle. And instead of her running away, and remember, she thought I was going to run away because that's what a guy in her eyes would do when he found out it comes with a girl. She didn't know who she had met then. So instead of running away, she smiled and she believed me. And of course, she believed me, right? That's why it's important about this. She was involved in it as well, right? She was involved in this mysterious experience alongside me. So a few weeks later, as fate would have it, so now we're in the frequency and things are happening, right? I didn't get a chance to talk to her yet, but I was like very excited to. And it really put an exclamation point, if I ever used one, on the fact that I had met the true love of my life. But as fate would have it, while I was traveling on a business trip, or actually I was going to see my father in France, my wife, who was now staying in my place, had a medical emergency, which prompted her to have to go to the hospital. And that triggered her mother and this little girl. Her name was Alexi. I didn't know her name. I just knew what she looked like. But they decided to travel to the States, probably to meet me, but also to care and support for, my wife, the chicken. So I rushed home from France, right? I mean, like, this is crazy, right? This is all just mysterious and magical. So I met her. I met Alexi. I met her in person. Um, she's 8 years old, radiant, curious. And what's interesting is when we met, because I was wondering if it was two-sided. When we met on both sides, me and this little girl felt like we were picking up on a conversation that we had started long before this lifetime. We both knew each other. And to be honest with you, we have not let go of one another. And our love is just a blazing fire, a blazing fire. Great morning to you, Niles. Great morning to you, Eugenio Hernandez. You're going to want to go back and listen to the beginning of this. But here's what's interesting. Here's an insight. Families, I believe, at this time, can be built by blood, and that's sometimes a good thing or a bad thing. But sometimes I believe that families, and this is in the realm of soulmates, twin flames, all that stuff, I think they're also written in by the universe. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. So here's the lesson from today. And this is kind of relating to that omen frequency. People very often would call a story like the one I've just shared with you. And I know you have a story like that, and I'd love to hear your story. If anybody wants to write their story and tag me and make sure that direct message me that I read it, I will 100% respond. But people very often refer to these things as luck, and that's fine. It has to do with timing or chance, right? There's a lot of things that could have prevented this from happening. Maybe so, but there's another explanation. And that's what I love about the way I look at life is I'm open to other explanations. And if you have one, feel free to share it. I call this the omen frequency. So it's this hidden channel that exists, and we all kind of know it exists, but it exists for all of us. It's a hidden channel that's broadcasting all around us, but also behind the radio station that you are listening to. And that's the one that you've been given by your mother, father, teacher, preacher, your programmers, and society, right? Sometimes we think we're tuning into the channel. I'm talking about the channel behind that, where things like deja vu exist and chance happenings and all that stuff. So this is a hidden channel behind that's broadcasting all around us through patterns, symbols, and disruptions, sometimes tough lessons, setbacks, letdowns, challenges, defeat, right? And these are all encounters that seem random until we start paying attention. And that's the value of using the part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, that you actually start thinking for yourself. And you can say something like, I haven't made up my mind about what I just saw, heard, or witnessed, but I'm going to think about it. That's your prefrontal cortex. So synchronicities, unlike omens, synchronicities are kind of the raw signals. And I think that we notice the synchronicities very often. But an omen is what happens, in my opinion. There's my opinion, right? Which I'm not stuck on. An omen is what happens when we interpret those signals with open curiosity and we match that signal to its meaning. That's the difference between a synchronicity and an omen. So if there's a difference, the omen frequency is saying, yes, synchronicities can dip into the world of the known, but an omen only exists on the omen frequency. And you have to be open and curious. You have to be that detective. You have to take that SD card called your brain and remove the right protect switch from it. Right? So when you match the signal to its meaning, life begins to make sense. Hence the Make Sense podcast, the Make Sense Academy, our private group where Bear, you can come hang out with Bear, where we just have like-minded people in there that are doing this work. And we have masterminds and all that stuff for less money than you spend in 2 days on food. But that's another story. But life begins to make sense. So the ancient Greeks actually practiced this, and I love the ancient Greeks, and they did this with their oracles, right? So Paulo Coelho, who famously wrote The Alchemist, speaks about Santiago, who's the main character. If you haven't read The Alchemist, my story is very, very much alchemy, right? transformation, turning lead into gold, right? So Santiago, the main character, learns in the story that once he awakens and taps into this frequency, everything begins to speak. Once you wake up, everything begins to speak. He claimed that the wind, the sand, and a stranger's words, right, no longer became things like superstition. It was a matter of participation. When we begin participating with what's really going on in the world, everything just can start to make sense for you. And what's interesting about all of that is that we have a choice. We can take the blue pill and just say, hey, great podcast, great live on Substack, but I'm going to go back to my regularly scheduled program and stay safe, which most people will do, to be honest with you. But you could also take the red pill, which takes courage, but it takes more than courage. It's fueled by curiosity. That's why I always say, and I love to ask a question whenever I think that I know something. What else might be true? What else is going on? And we teach that in the Make Sense Academy, how to build what we call a sorting filter. So the omen frequency is always broadcasting. It is right now. And once you hear it from that curious state, right, you have to be open to it. But once you hear it, even if you go back, you can't unhear it. And that's what I love about it. So my quick takeaways on this: love and miracles aren't found, they're noticed. What is the truth? I'll tell you what, we'll spend however many years, Michael, that the divine has given me to live. I'll be happy to give many, many versions of that. But I think that we will, here's my answer to that one, Michael. What is the truth? Whatever you think it is at the time, right? If you believe something to be true, it doesn't make it true. What you see is what you get, but it's not necessarily what is. It's just what you see and get. So I think the truth is something that was created by someone that needed to be able to think that they knew the truth, right? I think the truth is something that we can seek, right? But I don't think it's something that we need to find or will ever find, right? But that's just what I think. And I just enjoy thinking. That's what my brain does. So love and miracles aren't found. They're noticed. Okay. The universe doesn't shout. The universe does not shout things at us. It whispers. And it does so through a frequency that seems to be drowned out in this world full of noise. The universe and this omen frequency doesn't force itself upon us. It invites us. These little things that happen, I believe, are invitations and opportunities. Every time you quiet your story and think about what that means for you, every time you quiet the noise of your story that you keep telling and open your awareness, please, one happens before the other, I believe, you give those whispers a chance to be heard. That's why I practice meditation twice a day. Not so I can be cool, and it does have a physical and chemical effect on me, but it gives me an opportunity to let those voices, those whispers be heard. So whether it's reconciling with your past, like I said, expressed with my father, or recognizing the love that's been trying to find you, I believe that you're constantly being guided. The question is not whether the signal is playing or whether the frequency exists. It's whether or not you're tuned into it. Make sense? So what do we have here? Earth Star One. Michael says, thank you. Michael, I love your curiosity, by the way. So I'd like to know more about you. So DM me. Earth Star One says, I call this the boundless state of meaning. Ooh, I love that. I love that. I call this the boundless state of meaning and that is everywhere. I would prefer to call it the revelation frequency to omen. Well, then you go with that, right? Whatever you prefer, whatever your preference is. I don't have a preference, I don't need it to be called the Omen frequency. I would be fine calling it the revelation frequency as long as I could interpret it and understand it the same. I don't need to be right about what the name. So the challenge is to overcome is well-meaning. Yeah. Very nice for star one. I love that. Michelle says, I love this. I could listen to you all day. Wow. Thank you so much. You'd have to explain that to my wife and my children. Thank you, Dragon. I am happy for you and your and your chicken. Thank you so much, Michelle. Michelle, maybe. So anyway, if you learned something today, please consider giving it away because that's the only way that it's going to stay, right? The highest form of self-actualization as we know it is to serve others. So I just encourage you to recognize that you've just spent some time in the jacuzzi experience, right? Where we start to know, right? But remember, learning and knowing is nothing more than learning and knowing in the absence of action is nothing more than a distraction, right? So it's action time. And I believe that the greatest form of action is to take something that you learned and give it away. And here on Substack, how do we do that? We write about it. So write about it. Write about it. You know, Earth Star One, please write about the revelation frequency. Tag me, and let's have fun. Let's play tag you're it in Substack. But Substack is super cool because you guys can take these ideas and these thoughts, and rather than let them dissipate or get washed out by the noise, write about them and impact other people and start a movement. Right? We never know how far-reaching our words could be. Right? So love and appreciate you all. I hope that you'll tune into the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, which is just a phenom. You know, I'm not giving myself grace. I'm humbled by what is happening with that. A lot of fun stuff to have. When it comes to reading your pieces, if I don't see it, I won't be able to read it. And I always give my paid subscribers the benefit of the doubt. That's one of the things I provide them is I always really read all of their stuff. So if you want to support our show, we'd greatly appreciate it. But until then, we will see you next week. And we usually put out about 2 or 3 episodes a week on the podcast. If you want to know about the Make Sense Academy, just reach out to me. We offer a free 7-day trial, and you can come check out some of our masterminds and meet some of our amazing community. Love and appreciate you. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.